Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. We'll give everyone a moment to settle in. Mm, All right. So hello and happy D&I week. Thank you for joining us for tonight's webinar. I would like to introduce myself. My name is Gabriela Hunter Rodriguez, and I'm the Council on Professional Issues Chair. And I'm also here with my team.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shivani. I'm a D4 at Penn, and I'm an associate on the Council for Professional Issues.
Hi, I'm Dominique. I'm also an associate for the Council on Professional Issues, and I'm a D3 at Tufts.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Murphy. I'm the Director of Membership with ASDA, and I am the staff liaison for the Council on Professional Issues.
Thank you. We are so excited to welcome our panelists this evening. Dr. Jason Cummins graduated from Tufts University School of Dental Medicine in May of 2022. He currently serves as a clinical instructor in the Department of Public Health and Community Service, Division of Diversity and Inclusion, and as Director of Special Events for the nonprofit organization, Increasing Diversity in Dentistry. Dr. Rupali Kulkarni is a board-certified oral medicine specialist. She's an assistant professor of oral medicine at the University of Pennsylvania School of Dental Medicine and serves as the assistant director of the postgraduate oral medicine residency program. She served as the 2018 and 2019 National ASDA president and chaired the ASDA National Diversity and Inclusion Task Force. And Dr. Dylan Weber graduated from the University of Missouri, Kansas City School of Dentistry in 2020. During his time at UMKC, he served as the ASDA District 8 trustee. Dr. Weber resides and practices as a general dentist in Boston, Massachusetts, where he is a member of the ADA's Institute for Diversity and Leadership's current class. Before we begin, I'd like to share a couple housekeeping items. First, this webinar will be recorded and available to ASDA members through our website. We will take questions for the panelists throughout the webinar. Questions can be submitted at any time through the control panel located on the right-hand side of the screen. So now let's learn a little bit more about our panelists. Dr. Jason Cummins.
Hello, thank you so much for this introduction and for hosting this panel this evening. So originally from Barbados and moved to the United States when I was 18, went to undergrad in South Carolina, then moved up the coast to come to Tufts in Boston, where I serve as clinical instructor in the Department of Public Health and Community Service. And I also have the pleasure of collaborating with the Office of Admissions with outreach and recruitment. After I graduated, I went up to Maine, where I worked with Aspen Dental. So that was very different from the beautiful beaches and warmth of Barbados, but it was a great experience. And then moved back to Massachusetts to work at Tufts and also community health. So really glad to be here and just to share some of my perspective and some of the work that I've been doing. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming tonight. Dr. Rupali Kulkarni.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to serve on this panel. As you can see, I'm very passionate about ASDA still, even as a practicing dentist and faculty member. And anytime I have the opportunity to speak about DEI, I feel very fulfilled. So I grew up as the youngest of 3 girls in an immigrant household filled with lots of love, food, and music. And growing up in that environment really taught me to embrace all parts of myself. I grew up in a community that was quite a bit different than I am and how I identify, whether that was through race, religion, ethnicity. And ultimately, as I grew older, I realized that I held a lot of power in my voice and the differences that I brought to the table. My passion for DEI really blossomed when I was an undergraduate student at Northwestern University. I was actively involved as an inaugural member of a group called Sustained Dialogue, which you may have heard of. And the goal of that group was to combat discrimination, prejudice, by bringing people together of all different backgrounds to talk about how our various identities play into our interactions interactions, how they affect our experiences, and how we can really grow based off of our differences. So from there, not only did I realize how important commonalities can ground us, but it allowed me to really celebrate the differences that we all bring. So as you heard briefly in my bio, I was actively involved in ASDA, and I've stayed involved in organized dentistry as a dental professional. And I really believe in the value of bringing DEI to future dentists in order to ensure that we are bringing health to all. So I'm so excited to hear some of the questions this evening and serve alongside my fellow panelists.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Dylan Weber.
Thank you, everyone. I'm incredibly excited to be here, especially alongside two incredible people, especially Dr. Kulkarni. We have a long history of ASDA leadership together. But I have a very typical trajectory of a queer kid from small town Missouri who, through education and a career path, made his way out east. Similar to Dr. Kulkarni, I have always led forward in leadership in DE&I. I went to the University of Missouri and graduated in 2016, a relatively tumultuous time for college campuses in the country. We led a hunger strike and a series of racial-driven riots on our campus, and that really sparked first my recognition of privilege and how that intersected with also being a marginalized person and what that reflects into leadership. Now, in my current leadership journey as a trustee for the Massachusetts Dental Society and as the chair of the new dentist committee for the ADA First District, I continue at that intersection of D&I and organized dentistry, having served on that founding task force with Dr. Rup Kulkarni for ASDA's DE&I platform, and then currently in the IDL class for the ADA. So very excited for these questions.
We look forward to hearing from you guys tonight. And now we'll feed you some questions, so get ready.
Alrighty, so our first question is to Dr. Kulkarni. How does fostering a diverse, equitable, and inclusive environment enhance the educational experience for dental students and the dental professional overall?
Thank you for the question. So you heard a bit about my current professional state. I'm actually a full-time faculty member at the University of Pennsylvania. Just like Dr. Cummins, I'm also involved in admissions. And I think it's so interesting to reflect on how we got to where we are, how you really develop your passion. And so growing up, there weren't a lot of people who looked like me, who were in leadership roles, who were in the media, or who even were potentially in healthcare, who were sort of breaking down barriers. And nowadays, you know, we hear from patients that they don't always see a lot of people who look like them. And ultimately, our identity really does impact how we interact with the healthcare system, how we might perceive information that's being, given to us, and how we really ultimately make decisions about our health. And so ultimately, when we think about building community, I think of DEI really in terms of belonging, creating a culture of belonging. And so when we look at dental students today, they come from all different backgrounds, experiences, nationalities, and it's really amazing to see their passion for wanting to help others. I think ultimately we have that commonality of wanting to really bring smiles to the people around us. And when we create a culture of belonging, we're able to see people succeed and really reach their true potential rather than holding them back or using their identity really as a perpetual barrier to reaching a goal. I really see that in education itself. I really say that I learn the most from my students and residents who I work with more than anyone else, and it's because of their varied identities and backgrounds. In the dental profession as a whole, you can see that our landscape has changed significantly. We've had a lot more interaction with individuals, for example, with disabilities and increasing access to care for them. We have individuals who have come from all over the world who have never even seen a dentist before. And so I think when we value DEI in our dental education, we actually make our profession much stronger so that we can ultimately care for our population at a greater level. So my passion also lies in public health, and a lot of the work I do in the public health realm is really targeting individuals who are underserved and how we can really increase access to care for them. I really think that starts with DEI in education.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Our next question is going to be for Dr. Weber. So whenever you do research into DEI topics, what are the most reliable sources that you can pull facts from?
Thank you for that question. We were actually, as panelists, talking about this before the call because it is inevitably incredibly subjective based on the topic that you're searching within D&I. My perspective recently is I have a publication coming out about the dental treatment of individuals who are seeking gender-affirming care and how that relates to hormonal transitioning, hormonal replacement therapy, and things like that. And in a space that is relatively under-researched, you really have to dig deep. And the most important thing that I can offer is still searching for those peer-reviewed articles. But in the situations where you can't find them, we have to just lean into the science and know and rely on what we know for the general population for extrapolation purposes. So in my research in this topic specifically, we know how hormonal treatment for postmenopausal women can affect the health of the periodontium. Those same hormones are what are used to treat those individuals seeking gender-affirming care. So we extrapolate some of that information that is otherwise under-researched so that we can still care adequately for the patients who are seeking that expertise from us.
Alrighty, thank you, Dr. Weber. Our next question is for Dr. Cummins. So cultural humility is a very difficult skill to acquire. How do you inspire or encourage peers and colleagues to pursue it?
Yes, thank you for that question. So cultural humility, something that is a practice builder, not just for when we're seeing patients, but also when we're working together as colleagues. So it is for us to really be open-minded, learning, being intentional about not only learning each other's backgrounds in our classes, but also our patients. So when we're asking questions, we're leaving them open-ended and we're really trying to understand how does culture play a part in everyday life, again, leading to what is being done with their oral healthcare habits, so that we're not giving a one size fits all, but we're actually catering to our patient individually. So that just allows us to not just, one, get to know the patient, but allow them to be involved in the clinical decisions that we make, so that our outcomes can be better, right? And our patients they feel more comfortable trusting us and working with us because we've taken the time to get to know them and understand why they may be doing the things they're doing, or what may they have learned in the past and how we can work together to get that done. So one of the things I think we want to do is, again, understand that it's not something that will happen overnight. And we really do want to, just pay attention to it, really reflect on ourselves, even if it's something that happens after an encounter with a patient. Oh, maybe I could have asked this question. So it's very self-reflective as well. Couple other things, we want to do is make it really a team effort, again, with our classmates, celebrating the cultures that we have represented, again, with our patients, but also with the people who we're around, really making sure that we're continually learning. So sometimes we do need to get out our comfort zones to actually have that realization. It is easy for us to have our own biases. So kind of thinking before we speak is very intentional. And holding each other accountable. Sometimes, in the opportunities we can hear a classmate saying something, and it is okay to kind of have that discussion, I think, at that time, to just see maybe where their point of view was as well, or hey, maybe this is something you can do next time. And as we continue to grow as dental professionals, and especially for you guys as you're getting ready to enter into the real world, looking for offices, or even as you're a practice owner, diversifying your office, right? Because as it was said earlier, we can't control who comes into the office. But we also want to make sure our patients feel comfortable with people who look like them, people who may speak like them. Like at the health center where I was working, where majority of the patients spoke Spanish, just a simple hola or buenos dias, or, just even a greeting makes the world of a difference, even though you're going to use a translation service. So these little things, help again with cultural humility to fully embrace what our patients are going through so that we can make sure we get better outcomes.
Nice. Thank you for that, Dr. Cummins. So we have a question from an attendee. So this was a question from a student from University of Louisville School of Dentistry. And they said in the past, their main event organized by previous chairs was the multicultural night being held in the spring semester. They're looking to expand on this and explore new ideas for events and lunch and learns that can further promote DEI at their school. So what other initiatives or activities would you suggest to engage and inspire their community?
I don't mind starting. I think, those are, we do that in undergrad as well. And it's a continued effort to keep sharing and celebrating the diversity in our community. Also getting out into the community and also, is another great way. And something that we're also doing at Tufts is also sharing this with the faculty, right? So we want to make sure that as the generations are changing, as the cultures are being diversified, that our faculty are also able to understand what's really happening and how they can grow along with the students to, work with highlighting the various cultures. So, I think that's a great step and something that needs to be continued. And I think sometimes just more often to really highlight all the various aspects of DEI and the cultures at the school.
I'm sure Shivani has seen a lot of this, being one of the students at the school I teach at. But I think one of the strengths of working at an institution is there are a lot of students that form different cultural groups or clubs that you could potentially collaborate with. I always love when I see our ASDA chapter, and I am, shameless plug, the proud faculty advisor of the ASDA chapter at Penn. I love seeing them collaborate with some of the cultural student groups. One, just to expand their own knowledge, but two, to pool resources to, expand the population that you're really promoting the event to. And completely agreed on incorporating events that allow faculty and staff to also interact with students. I think that really bridges community well. I think as you talk about engage and inspire, I think as you explore topics in DEI, you could certainly think about workshops. So I actually served as a DEI consultant for an FQHC, and I was able to do topics that fall under things like unconscious bias, cultural, humility, cultural competency, building allies. And it was a really interactive session where I think if you do it in a setting of a school, that students really get to see how it's going to impact them as a dentist. So I think a lot of dental school is asking the question, why? Why are we learning this? Why is it so important to my future practice? And I think if you can bring that reality to, building relationships with patients or with your staff or with like scenarios or interactive workshops, I think it really helps you not only interact with the material differently, but really gain tangible skills. And I think that's almost an easier way to sometimes delve into these deeper and difficult topics that fall under DEI. I've seen some of those be extremely successful at schools. I actually spoke at an ASDA chapter about women in leadership. It was to celebrate Women's History Month. And it was really amazing to see so many people who didn't identify as female also be there to serve as allies. And so I think if you can promote it as building tangible skills in the realm of DEI, you might find some good success with events.
I'm glad Dr. Kulkarni used the term workshop. I did a quick search just to make sure it still exists. There is still a how-to guide on ASDANet for diversity and inclusion workshops. I will say one of the shortfalls of that, having Dr. Rupali and I been two of the individuals who worked on drafting it, is the intersection and reliance on outside organizations for the expertise in certain topics that they bring. So if any of you as leaders or as members seek that how-to guide out, there is an incredible amount of importance in leaning into the expertise of those groups, especially in an uncertain time in academia and higher education, when the existence of those groups may or may not be questioned at your institution. Being able to lean into those that still exist is incredibly important, just to help you get some of the grassroots efforts of launching those events, especially into more targeted topics and audience groups.
Thank you all for your really thoughtful answers on that question. The next question we have is to Dr. Weber. So if a patient were to ask you a question pertaining to D&I, what considerations do you have when speaking to them versus speaking to colleagues?
Thank you. So I'm going to piggyback on an answer Dr. Cummins gave earlier, or a little bit of insight. And that is ultimately accountability. And a lot of that is perspective of myself as a practitioner and the demographics of my office, which I'll get into, and the population I treat. So I practice in one of the more rural conservative pockets of Massachusetts, which is rare for New England, especially in our state. But accountability is one of the biggest things that I can lean into. I am also the only Caucasian, non-visible, marginalized person in my practice. All of my assistants are Hispanic. My office manager is from Ghana. We have a very visibly diverse group. And I think in the population pocket that I treat, patients lean on me to want to validate some of their internal biases. And the biggest thing that I can say is holding accountability. Even for the patients who aren't seeking affirmation of their own biases, the patients who seek our practice because they want that, and they want that inclusive and representative environment, just them visible or verbally hearing me stand up against things that are said in the practice is incredibly beneficial. To just subtle things that I have done as a practice owner. I have a bio sheet in my lobby that asks what my favorite movie is. And I put Call Me By Your Name. It is not my favorite movie. There are a lot of downsides of that movie, but for a queer person who is seeking a queer dentist without me having to publicly come out to every patient that enters my door, that is kind of a green flag for them to seek care in my office. The flip side of that is that after my husband and I got married 2 years ago, I had a very stark internal battle on whether I wanted to hang our wedding photo in our lobby. Obviously, incredible benefit to myself, but to the patients who wanted to see that. But I didn't want constant battles with patients who would be upset by seeing that their dentist is part of a same-sex couple. But ultimately, as Dr. Cummins said earlier, it's accountability. I know the space that I want to create for the patients who need that space. I know the space I want to create for my staff who value the fact that they work in an incredibly diverse office. So at the end of the day, I don't shy away from any of those conversations with patients. If anything, it allows me to be a better practitioner because it allows me to also tackle my own internal biases that I might have and just open up positive and honest conversation and dialogue with my patients.
If I can add to that, accountability, also for self. It is easy to miss something. And I think it's also important to give grace to self and knowing that it can be rectified. I remember having my own instance where, sometimes I was in a rush, so I was looking at patient's chart, looking at the name, and then realizing actually that they went by a different name. And I actually stopped, spoke to my dental assistant, went back in the room, apologized, said, I really want to make sure that you feel comfortable here. What is your preferred name? Because one of the things that is also a bit tricky and that's still being worked on is what name is in the chart, but what is different from the insurance form, what's different from billing. And that allows, again, when we're looking at accountability, I then further asked, okay, well, what steps do we want to take to make sure that everything is on the same plane so that we don't have to go through, or you as the patient, I don't want you having to go through this again. So we were able to then take steps forward to, okay, I'm going to make sure my front desk updates this. Let's make sure we work with your insurance to get your name updated. And these are things and steps, again, that allows us, again, to not only hold ourselves accountable, make our patients feel better and feel safe, so that, again, they can live, you know, not in a worry of, well, I'm never going to go back to the dentist. And, you know, because we understand the traumas that a lot of our patients already have. So I think self accountability is also great, but also understanding that we do need grace for ourselves, because we're also human, but we're intentionally learning how to be better.
Awesome. Thank you both for that. So our next question, we touched on it a little bit, but this one's for Dr. Kulkarni. So as we're all learning and growing into being more inclusive, it's inevitable that we might misspeak or make a mistake. In these scenarios, how do you go about rectifying a mistake in a respectful way? Or on the other hand, how do you conduct yourself in situations with someone who has blatant disregard or is disrespecting cultural sensitivity or other DI topics?
This is an extremely important question. It certainly touches upon a few things that Dr. Weber and Dr. Cummins were discussing in their practices. It's important to acknowledge that the space of DEI is ever changing, and the terminology we use is changing. You know, how we interact with each other is changing, and it's certainly influenced by many pieces, socially, economically, politically. What is going on really drives a lot of that. And I think as people who have committed themselves to helping others, who have committed themselves to healthcare, a few of the rules that I kept in mind when I learned even how to interact in this space and sort of facilitate some of these dialogues were a few things. One is to really speak through personal experiences, right? So it's easy sometimes to generalize or to stereotype, but when we're, you know, interacting with someone, I think it's important to really acknowledge that we all come from things in a different perspective. And that really stems from this idea of intersectionality of our, you know, social dimensions. You know, how we identify maybe perhaps in a few ways is the same, but in many ways it might be different. And so I think it's acknowledging that we're coming from personal experience. I think the second thing is always assuming best intentions, which can be a really difficult thing to do. But many times when we're learning, you're absolutely right, we will inevitably make a mistake. And I think in the space of DEI, it's very important to put that best foot forward and assume best intention so that we can take that opportunity to perhaps educate someone and also educate ourselves on how to move forward rather than taking it from the defensive, which I think happens many times in this space because a lot of what we're discussing is so personal and it's so tied to who we are. But I think that assuming best intentions is a great rule to go by. And I think the other thing is to listen and listen to learn rather than listening to reply. And that's a hard skill that is difficult sometimes to incorporate, especially when in patient care with our teams, right? We're working at such a fast pace and, you know, we're trying to, in all of a few milliseconds, build rapport with someone as we walk through the door. But when we focus on empathic listening versus active listening, I think we really elevate our ability to learn. So there is this cute little phrase that we used to use in facilitation when someone made a mistake or someone said something that offended someone, and we used to say, oops, ouch. And what that really means is, oh, there was a moment where, you know, something you said really offended me, or I took it personally. And that's the ouch part. And someone's, you know, might have misspoke and they didn't mean to use that word or that phrase. And they would say, oops. And it was almost like a timeout to say, let's assume those best intentions. Let's talk a little bit about why that felt uncomfortable and to lean into that to say, what can we do to move forward and rectify that situation? So although I don't physically say, oops, ouch in the world, I actually keep that in the back of my mind when I'm interacting with patients, with colleagues, with staff. And just like Dr. Weber and Dr. Cummins, I've had to make some difficult decisions and I've also made many mistakes. I've interacted with patients who they've looked at me and said that, you know, I'm young, I'm not white, I'm female. And so they've automatically treated me a certain way. And I think that stems from not only some of our biases, but a lot of, you know, in especially the dental world, a lot of that comes from fear, right? When people come to us and they're seeking care, they're in a very vulnerable position. This part of the body shows so much of who someone is. And I think we have to acknowledge that and create spaces where people can actually express some of that fear. So that's one tactic I use, is really to listen and to understand what someone's goals are and how we can maybe overcome fear together. That could be fear of the unknown. That could be fear of pain. That could be fear of we're different. How are we going to interact with each other towards my health? So that's one sort of aspect of it. The second really is in regards to, interacting with students or faculty or, colleagues who perhaps are saying things that wouldn't necessarily fall under DEI. I think it is important. I think both of my fellow panelists have touched on accountability, but I also think it comes from wanting to better oneself. And how do we, focus on being the best professionals, the best doctors we can be? I think that comes from acknowledging that we're always going to make mistakes. And so if we do, how can we create a space where someone can acknowledge that without feeling shamed, without feeling judged? And I think that's always a work in progress, especially as we're continuing to evolve with the terminology we use. So if, for example, someone says something that's considered outdated now or is not, politically correct, I think it is within our safe space to say, from my personal experience, this is how that made me feel. Perhaps this is something, you could, look into. This is a resource. This is, a way to speak. I think when we rely on each other to learn, it becomes less scary. It becomes a natural part of wanting to better yourself in the space of healthcare. So I really appreciate that question. I think it's so important to talk about those. And if you want to keep some of those rules with you, assume best intentions, speak from personal experience, listen to learn, and oops, ouch, the way you feel, I think those will guide you as you're interacting with people from all different backgrounds.
I think the empathic listening, as Dr. Kulkarni touched on, is so important. And I'll preface this by saying there was a time in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space where the assumption that all human beings have the capability to be empathetic was discredited. And that was almost used as an excuse for individuals who look like me to navigate those spaces. As we have evolved in this space over the last 8 to 10 years, there's been a shift of education from education of terminology, et cetera, to the open dialogue that Dr. Kulkarni touched on, and that's so important. When she spoke about fear, there are so many patients who innately fear me as their provider, especially those who are visible minorities, because of incredibly disturbing patterns of healthcare in the American healthcare system. And for a long time, my approach as a affluent Caucasian male was to say, this is my resume of my work in the DE&I space, so you should trust me. And that didn't matter, because to that patient, all of the work that I've done, the presentations I've given, the papers I've written, none of those mattered to how it affected them specifically. And it did nothing to overcome that fear. So the intentional listening and empathetic dialogue is so critical as the DE&I space continues to change, because it's becoming so multifaceted and even more intersectional than we ever thought. It is getting down to that just basic ability to empathize and speak to a human being and gain that trust from them on an interpersonal level.
Thank you both. It looks like we have time for one final question here. So we'll pose this one to Dr. Cummins, but everyone can feel free to chime in. So this question is, what are some of the biggest challenges when trying to implement DEI initiatives? And what ideas do you have to approach these challenges?
So I think one of the things right now is us wanting to avoid the ooch ouch, right? I think this is, again, we have to be vulnerable in ourselves. We have to be open-minded. And if that's something that we're not willing to do, we tend to kind of cage ourselves and not wanting to participate, which is unfortunate. Again, as we are health providers, we should be wanting to embrace. We're not saying that you have to completely change your views, but as a provider, the goal is to understand our patient, understand where they're coming from. again, helping them feel comfortable so that they can open up to us so that we can treat them in the best way. So at Tufts, one of the things, we have a diversity and inclusion course, which spans over 3 years, as well as our first year PG students are also taking this course. And, one of the things we try to do is get shared agreements, aspirations, and conditions so that we try to create that safe space. Again, not everyone is in for that, or they're like, well, what does this have to do with being a dentist? What does this have to do, because this is not related to teeth? But even before we look at teeth, we are looking at the human. So it's really important for us to remember that, again, looking at ourselves to see, well, what would I want my provider to do? Not just as a dentist, but in healthcare. So I think how we combat a lot of these things is really looking at ourselves and seeing how would we want to be treated, no matter where we go. Again, having open dialogue, not just discussion or debate, but having dialogue in understanding personal perspective, right? Trying to place ourselves potentially in someone else's shoes to really understand the gravity of the lives that we've all had to live, you know? So allowing empathy to really shine through so that, again, we can take the necessary steps to move forward. So something also that, we can try to do within our communities, again, as has said before, more workshops. We're not saying that you need to say something, but again, actively and empathetically listen. Allow it to just kind of sink in and reflect so that we can see how we can play a role, again, as an advocate for our patients, but also for our colleagues, because we want everyone to feel safe and to make sure that we're doing what we need to do to move forward in this profession and also in healthcare. And then I'll again, having these inclusive, community events, not just in our schools, but also in the community, again, bridging these gaps where, again, we don't know who's coming into the office on a particular day. So we do have to be intentional and be open with ourselves to say, hey, I really do need to learn this. I really, where I was, where I'm working, I really should learn a Spanish term, right? Or Spanish terms so I can bridge that gap with my patients. So there needs to be some, again, self-awareness to want to be better, again, for our patients. So that would be, some of the things that I would share.
I'll just very briefly add to that too about what I see challenges, especially in the sort of next generation that's engaging with all of this, is many times when we're embracing something new or different, or we're embracing what's become more of a buzzword or a buzz term, is we become sometimes performative with it. And one of the things I want to applaud ASDA for always, and of course, this is really a testament to all the attendees who are taking time out of their busy schedules to be here, is that you all have always embraced change and embrace these difficult topics with such a genuine nature and a genuine attitude towards wanting to improve the experience for dental students. And I think many organizations and companies, they are trying to incorporate topics that fall under DEI or fall under wellness, for example. And I think a challenge is, how do you embrace it in a genuine way over a superficial way? And I think it starts from trying something, right? Dr. Cummins mentioned, an event or working with your community or a workshop. Try something new or different that, you want to, and that perhaps that's going to be your legacy. I know Dr. Weber was so instrumental in bringing a lot of this to his school and his district. And it's because he just said, let me try something new. Let me try something that's difficult. And we might fail at it, but if we don't try, we're never going to be able to create a foundation for growth and change. So that's one of the things. I think the second thing is, don't be afraid to say, I don't know. I think especially when you're a student and you're put under a lot of pressure at school, imposter syndrome can be very real. And it's okay to say, I don't know enough about this. I just want to learn. So if you're attending an event and you're not necessarily leading it, just say, I wanted to learn something new. That's why I'm here. And I think that's really a key step in overcoming some of the challenges to interacting with DEI. And I think the last is being authentic to you while putting your best foot forward and wanting to learn more. I think that's very critical. And I think that can be a challenge when you sort of look inward and say, wow, I'm experiencing like privilege guilt, for example, or I'm experiencing, what it really means to be an ally. And perhaps I haven't done that. And so I think it's normal to go through a process of self-reflection. And I think that's important. But embracing who you are and allowing yourself to grow in a healthy way is extremely critical to overcome some of those challenges.
Thank you guys so much. It's truly an incredible opportunity to hear from you all, and we genuinely appreciate the time that you're taking out of your busy day to speak with us. The imposter syndrome is definitely real, but it's great that all the attendees are coming, and just even being part of this and listening to these amazing doctors speak, I think is taking a step in the right direction. So again, thank you all for coming. So I would love to hear, I'm sure we all would, a final thought or key takeaway you would like to provide for our attendees, starting with Dr. Weber.
Yes, again, thank you all for being here and showing up. And I mean, and that's my biggest takeaway. And to echo some of the things Dr. Kulkarni just said, it's difficult to keep showing up. And it's exhausting to keep showing up, especially when we are the individuals who live these experiences, not only in our professional lives and the lives that we put forward in the DE&I space, but also in our personal lives every day. It can be draining to be the one showing up. But as my IDL project this year has shown, every facet of the ADA tripartite, all leaders in dentistry struggle with launching these initiatives, keeping them consistent, keeping them relevant, and keeping them pertinent to our patients first. So many of the times we focus these towards, I will say, blaming and wanting to educate the majority. And I have found that the most critical thing that we can do is just to continue to have open dialogue and to open up the spaces for dialogue. And it might be those of us who look like us or have the same lived experiences as us, but every once in a while we'll get somebody in that space that really wants to learn. And those are the individuals who, quite frankly, can make the biggest impact to their patients and to the individuals they interact with, because those people don't expect that perspective from them. So after a decade of work and leadership in DE&I, just keep showing up, keep having the difficult conversations. It's okay to check out. It's okay to say it's too much at any given time, but we do it for ourselves, and we do it for the experiences that we want to have as people and as patients. And that's what we can really put forward to our patients.
Thank you. And next, Dr. Cummins.
Yes. You know, I'm inspired by everything that was said here tonight. And again, as Dr. Rowe was saying, showing up. And it is showing up every day. And I think what I'll leave you all with is, this is all, everything we're doing and saying tonight is all something that takes practice. And again, just being intentional. And in terms of, again, cultural humility, it being a practice builder, taking time to do our research, taking time to, be uncomfortable. But again, it's only to make us better. And, allow self-reflection, because that's going to really allow us to be genuine to getting to know our patients, getting to know our teams, creating environments where, from you being the leader in your office or at your school or in your community, allows that to trickle down to continue making a ripple effect, a positive ripple effect, to make genuine change. And it, again, only leads to a better outcome. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And Dr. Kulkarni.
One of my favorite quotes that I keep with me is, "We build too many walls and not enough bridges." And I don't mean dental bridges, but I mean bridges or connections between each other. And I keep that with me because sometimes it's easy to stay in the space that we are. Sometimes it's easier to keep the thinking patterns that we do. And it is harder to break down some of our own barriers and be vulnerable so that we can build genuine connections with those around us. And so what I'll leave you with really is a challenge or a call to action of How do you plan on cultivating a culture of belonging where you go? Whether that's with your classmates, your faculty, whether that's when you graduate, it's with your team, your staff, or whether that's with your patients, and truly even in your personal life. How do you plan on cultivating a culture of belonging? Maybe that means you work on your empathic listening. Maybe that means you take a step back to reflect on your own, listening style or leadership style. Maybe that means you take a second to talk to someone you never thought you'd talk to before and learn something new about them. Whatever that may look like in your day-to-day life, it is a practice. It is a daily decision that you'll make to think about belonging and how it makes you feel when you belong. And that feeling is so special. I hope that you carry that with you and that it influences your actions and interactions.
Thank you again to our panelists for kicking off D&I Week with us and sharing their insights and passion about this topic with ASDA during the session. Be sure to check ASDA's Instagram throughout the week as we highlight ASDA members and chapters D&I initiatives, and look for more live and on-demand webinars through ASDA's website. Enjoy the rest of your evening.